The station was supposed to be empty, but the human cleaner felt eyes on him from the shadows. Relon Voss had worked in this part of the orbiting sanctuary for months, and he had learned to expect silence. The hum of the life support systems, the faint vibration through the metal floors, the occasional echo of distant machinery, these were the sounds that kept him company. But tonight felt different. A shiver ran down his spine as he wiped the dust from a low corridor. Somewhere nearby something was watching. He paused and listened. There was a soft clicking sound, almost like claws on metal, but lighter, delicate, careful. He frowned. The room was supposed to be empty. No creatures were housed here anymore. All the experiments had been moved or decommissioned. Yet the feeling persisted. Relon stepped forward cautiously. He carried only a mop and a small bucket, nothing to threaten anyone, or anything. He spoke softly, though he did not expect a reply. "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice sounded strange against the quiet, too loud and too human. No answer came, only the soft clicking again, retreating slightly as if whatever it was curious but shy. He followed the sound to the far corner of the room. Behind a broken security screen, he saw a small shape huddled in the shadows. It was tiny, no larger than a human child, but unlike any human. Its scales were dark with a faint shimmer, and its eyes glowed with soft amber light. The creature trembled, making small noises that were more like whispers than roars. Relon froze. He had heard rumors about abandoned dragons, creatures left behind when the sanctuary could not control them. They were dangerous, or so the story said. But this one looked nothing like the legends. It was weak, scared, and alone. Its wings were folded tightly against its body, and it seemed almost too small to survive in this empty station. The human crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Hey, I won't hurt you," he said. His voice was calm, even though his heart was racing. The creature tilted its head, watching him carefully. For a moment, Relon thought it might flee. Instead, it stayed trembling. Its eyes blinked in a way that felt almost human, full of fear and curiosity at the same time. Relon sat down on the cold floor, leaving his mop where it fell. "I clean this place," he said softly. "I make it safe. I can stay here with you if you want." The dragon hatchling's glowing eyes narrowed slightly, then widened. A faint pulse of light ran along its scales, a sign of nervous energy. It had never seen anyone approach without fear. Over the next hour, Relon did not try to touch it. He just spoke and moved slowly, cleaning a small area nearby. He noticed that the creature seemed to mimic some of his movements. When he wiped the floor in smooth circles, it tapped its tiny claws against the metal in the same pattern. When he hummed a soft tune to himself, the glow in its eyes flickered in rhythm. Relon realized he was witnessing something rare. This hatchling was not just scared, it was learning, watching, and trying to understand. He smiled despite the tension. "You're clever," he whispered. "I think you just need someone who listens." He left food nearby, a simple nutrient gel the station stocked for emergencies. The dragon sniffed it but did not eat at first. Instead, it watched him, tilted its head, and made a soft, vibrating sound from its throat. Relon could not understand the sound, but it was not a roar. It was more like a question, a gentle inquiry into the strange human who had appeared in its world. Days passed and Relon continued his work. He cleaned, fixed small leaks, and left the hatchling in peace. Gradually it grew bolder. It began to approach him slowly, stretching its tiny wings and testing its legs. One day, it tapped his hand lightly with a claw. Relon froze, then held still. The tap was not aggressive, it was tentative, almost shy. He responded by touching it gently with the back of his hand. Its glow flickered in excitement, then settled into a steady amber. He started bringing small toys and tools to help the hatchling interact with its environment. A loose gear became a spinning toy, a small mirror reflected its glowing eyes back at it. Every night, Relon whispered words and hummed tunes, never demanding anything. The dragon learned to respond with gestures, movements, and pulses of light. It was slow, careful, but Relon realized it understood far more than anyone had assumed. One night, as he rested against the wall after cleaning, he felt the air change. A presence, powerful and silent, filled the room. Relon could not see it, but the hatchling stiffened, wings rising slightly. Its body glowed brighter, almost in warning. Relon's heart pounded. He realized with a shock that someone, or something, was watching them. Not from the shadows, but from somewhere far beyond the station's walls. He stayed still, whispering softly to the hatchling. "It's okay, stay calm." The creature seemed to respond to his calmness, curling against the floor and letting the glowing pulse fade to a soft heartbeat. The presence did not leave, but Relon felt no immediate danger. Instead, he sensed curiosity, intelligence, and a weight of authority in the unseen eyes. For the first time, Relon understood that this small, quiet dragon was not just alone in the station. It had a family. And that family was watching. But tonight it was just the two of them. And for now that was enough. Relon smiled at the hatchling, tired but content. "We'll figure this out together," he said. And for the first time since he arrived at the abandoned station, he did not feel empty. He had a purpose: to care for the creature that no one else had wanted, to show it that being silent did not mean being ignored. Outside the station, far beyond the reach of human eyes, the unseen observer remained still. It did not move closer. It only watched. And in the quiet glow of the hatchling's eyes, a promise began to form, one that would change everything. No one believed the dragon could ever speak, but the human never tried to make it roar. Relon Voss had learned quickly that forcing a creature never worked. The hatchling responded to patience, not pressure. Every day, Relon spent hours with it in the small corner of the abandoned station. He cleaned, he fixed broken panels, and he spoke softly even when the dragon did not reply. The hatchling, which Relon now called Leora, began to understand his presence. It watched him carefully, its amber eyes flickering like tiny stars. Sometimes it tapped the floor or tilted its head. Sometimes, it sent tiny waves of light along its scales that danced like a heartbeat. Relon realized these were not random movements. They were gestures, patterns meant to communicate. He tried to follow them. When Leora tapped twice in quick succession, he tapped twice back. When she glowed in a slow pulse, he matched the rhythm by tapping a clean panel. It was slow, painstaking work, but Relon did not mind. He knew that understanding a being like this required attention. Other humans on the station called it a lost cause. Dragons like that? They're defective. They'll never speak. "You're wasting your time," one of the engineers had said when Relon mentioned his efforts. But Relon ignored them. He had never been afraid of silence. He had never needed applause or recognition. Instead, he made little tools to help Leora interact. A small metal ball that rolled when nudged. A shiny shard of glass that reflected light across the walls. Simple toys, nothing sophisticated, but enough to let her experiment with cause and effect. He watched as she tapped the ball to make it roll, then nudged the shard to see the reflections dance across the metal walls. Each success made her pulse brighter, faster. At night, Relon would sit beside her corner with a small lantern. He spoke softly, telling stories of the stars, of humans he had known, of simple things like the color of the sky or the smell of fresh water. He did not expect her to repeat words, but he hoped she would understand meaning. Sometimes she leaned closer, her wings stretching slightly as though trying to embrace his voice. One evening, as the station's dim lights hummed, Leora surprised him. She made a long, slow pulse of amber light that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Relon froze. He had not taught her this. She was choosing the rhythm herself, trying to connect with him in her own way. He reached out his hand slowly. She hesitated, then brushed her glowing claw against his palm. It was a gesture of trust, and it made Relon's chest tighten. He smiled. "I think you're trying to tell me something," he whispered. From that night they began a small routine. Each day Relon cleaned and repaired, but he also taught Leora patterns. Tap tap meant yes. Glow long meant quiet. Tap glow tap meant curiosity. Leora learned quickly. She copied the rhythms with more confidence, sometimes adding her own patterns that Relon could not yet understand. The sanctuary station AI noticed unusual signals coming from the lower decks. Tiny pulses of electromagnetic energy that were too patterned to be natural. Scientists began to suspect that a creature was communicating in a way they did not understand. But when they sent inspectors to check, they found nothing. Just an empty corner and a human who smiled quietly to himself. Relon didn't care about the AI. He cared about Leora. One day he brought her a small slate and a piece of chalk. He drew simple shapes, a circle, a line, a triangle. He tapped each shape as he drew it, showing her that each symbol had meaning. Leora watched, then glowed in short bursts, touching the shapes with her tiny claws. She repeated the taps with her light. She was learning not just to mimic, but to create her own symbols. Sometimes he noticed she tried to produce sound, soft vibrations that were almost inaudible. They were not roars, not the deep, terrifying sounds people expected from dragons. They were gentle hums, more like a song. Relon listened carefully, matching his own voice to hers. Slowly the sounds became longer, more deliberate. Days turned into weeks. Leora grew stronger and more confident. She explored her little corner of the station, stretching her wings and curling around objects with curiosity. She learned to pull objects toward her, to stack small panels like blocks. Relon clapped quietly each time she succeeded. She responded with a tiny flick of light, almost like laughter. One evening while they were practicing a new pattern, Relon realized something. Leora had begun to anticipate his moves. She tapped the floor before he did, glowed in reply before he signaled. She was not just learning, she was thinking ahead. He marveled at the intelligence in her bright amber eyes. He paused and looked around the empty station. No one believed this dragon could ever communicate. No one believed it could ever speak in any meaningful way. And yet, here she was, learning from a human cleaner who had no title, no rank, no weapons, no authority. Just patience, attention, and a desire to help. Outside, the airlocks hissed. Somewhere beyond the walls, the dragon matriarch watched. She had followed the signals of her child for days, unseen. She saw the patterns of light, the gentle interaction, the growing trust. She remained hidden, curious but cautious. She had underestimated the human at first, assuming he was like the others who had failed. Now she was starting to reconsider. Leora turned her glowing eyes to the unseen watcher, as if sensing her mother's presence. Her pulses of light slowed, careful and steady. Relon noticed and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Everything is fine." The hatchling relaxed, curling closer to him, glowing faintly in response to his calm tone. Relon knew the moment was fragile. One misstep could frighten Leora, could make her retreat into silence. But he also knew that communication was possible, that trust could overcome fear. No one had believed it before. No one had tried in the right way. And he realized that sometimes, all it took was someone who would listen instead of demand, someone who would watch instead of judge. That night, Relon and Leora rested side by side. The human cleaner whispered stories of stars, of planets, of humans who had shown kindness in unexpected ways. Leora glowed softly, tapping small rhythms against the floor that matched the cadence of his words. Outside the station, the matriarch remained still, watching her child learn in a way no one had thought possible. For the first time, Relon understood. Speaking was not about sound or power or fear. It was about connection. And in that quiet, abandoned station, a human and a small dragon were discovering a language that no one had thought could exist. The first word did not come as sound, it came as meaning. Relon Voss had been working with Leora for weeks. Every day they had followed a routine of patterns, taps, and pulses of light. Leora had learned to respond, to imitate, to create small symbols of her own. But speaking, real speaking, had seemed impossible. Dragons were not known for words, and no one had believed she could ever communicate in that way. Tonight the station was quiet. The hum of the life support systems was low, and only the faint vibrations of machinery echoed through the metal corridors. Relon sat cross-legged on the floor, his lantern casting soft shadows. Leora curled in front of him, glowing faintly, her wings folding gently at her sides. He reached out his hand and tapped a simple pattern. Short pulse, long pulse, short pulse. The pattern meant friend. Leora's eyes flickered, and then she responded, not with sound, not with movement, but with a slow, deliberate pulse of light that matched the meaning perfectly. It was as if she had understood the word, not just the pattern. Relon's chest tightened. He whispered, "Yes, yes, I'm your friend." She tilted her head, and her body glowed in a soft wave. Then something extraordinary happened. Leora sent a pulse directly toward him, not random, not patterned, but clear meaning. He felt it in his mind, like a thought carried gently across the space between them. The word was simple, safe. Relon froze. The word was not spoken aloud. It did not need to be. He understood it perfectly. "Safe," he whispered back. "Yes, you are safe." The hatchling pulsed again, quicker this time, a bright flicker of light that carried the weight of relief, trust, and recognition all at once. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The station seemed to hold its breath. Then Leora tapped the floor 3 times, a new gesture, and Relon realized she had just asked a question. "Alone?" he guessed. He nodded slowly. Not alone anymore. Never alone. The hatchling's eyes widened, the glow spreading across her small body like sunlight on water. Relon reached out, letting her touch his hand. She pressed her tiny claw to his palm. The word passed between them again, not sound, not noise, but clear and unambiguous. "Friend." Relon smiled, trying not to let his excitement spill over. He whispered stories, simple ones, about humans he had known, about quiet acts of kindness, about stars and planets far away. And Leora responded with light and gentle vibrations. For the first time, Relon realized that she was not mimicking him anymore. She was thinking, understanding, choosing. The station AI, monitoring for unusual activity, registered the energy pulses and recorded them for analysis. Scientists on the main decks began to speculate. Some suggested that a new form of dragon communication had been discovered. Some worried it could be dangerous. But Relon did not care. He only cared about the hatchling who had learned that someone cared enough to listen. A week later, Leora surprised him again. She tapped a new sequence of patterns, one he had not taught her. Relon studied it carefully. Then slowly he realized she had formed a complete thought. Friend, stay. He repeated it aloud. Yes, I will stay. Leora's glow shone brighter than ever, her wings stretching slightly, her body vibrating with joy. The first true word had been formed, not a roar, not a shout, not a sound meant to scare, but a message of trust. Relon's heart swelled with pride. No one had believed it possible. And yet here it was, happening in the quiet of an abandoned station. That night, as he rested beside her corner, Relon noticed movement at the edge of the station. A shadow, powerful and silent, watched them through sensors that even he could not see. He sensed it, a presence heavier than any he had felt before. The dragon matriarch, Leora's mother, had arrived. She did not move closer, but she observed, her massive body beyond the walls, unseen, weighing every pulse of light and gesture. Leora sensed her presence too. Her glow flickered, hesitant at first, then steady as she turned toward the shadow. It was clear she knew someone powerful was near, but she did not retreat. She had learned something new, trust. She looked at Relon, then pulsed once, slowly with the meaning, do not fear. Relon nodded. I am not afraid, he whispered. And for the first time he realized that this small dragon had not just learned to speak, she had learned confidence. Days passed and their communication grew stronger. Leora began using more symbols, more pulses, more taps. She tried short vibrations that carried small ideas, play, food, safe, friend. Each time, Relon responded patiently, never forcing her to speak aloud, never demanding anything she could not give. One evening, Relon brought a small slate and a piece of chalk. He drew shapes representing the words she had begun to understand. Circle for friend, line for safe, triangle for home. Leora studied them, then tapped and glowed in return, experimenting, sometimes adding new shapes of her own. Relon realized she was creating a written form of communication, a language of her own making. The AI picked up the new signals and this time the council could not ignore it. They sent messages demanding that the hatchling be moved for study. Relon refused, quietly but firmly. Leora's first words had not been made to impress humans, they were made for connection, and he would not let that be stolen. That night, Leora curled beside him, small and bright, her wings folded protectively. Relon whispered gently, you did it. You spoke. She pulsed in reply, a slow, steady beat of light that said simply, I did. You helped. Outside the station, the matriarch observed. She had come to see her child learn, to see the bond that had formed. She remained silent, but Relon could feel her approval, like a quiet wave passing through the station. Leora glowed once more, sending a pulse to her unseen mother that meant, I am safe. I have a friend. For the first time, Relon understood the truth. Speaking was not just about sound. It was about meaning, about trust, about patience. And in the quiet, empty corner of a forgotten station, a human and a small dragon had created something no one else had believed possible. A bridge of understanding that went beyond words. The galaxy arrived too late to stop what had already changed. Relon Voss had known it would not be long before the council noticed the unusual activity in the lower decks. The strange patterns of light, the signals of communication, and the intelligence Leora had displayed could not remain hidden forever. And yet he felt no fear. He had done nothing wrong. He had only cared. The station shuddered slightly as a transport vessel docked in the main bay. Officials arrived, their sleek uniforms gleaming under the harsh lights. Scientists, observers, and security personnel moved quickly through the corridors, their eyes scanning every corner. They expected to find chaos, a creature out of control, or a human overwhelmed by his charge. What they found was different. In the small, dim corner of the lower deck, Relon knelt beside Leora. The hatchling's eyes glowed softly, pulsing in rhythm with his words. She tapped the floor gently, sending signals the humans could not yet understand. Relon raised his hands slowly. She is safe, he said calmly. She is learning. She does not need fear or force. The council representatives paused, unsure how to respond. One of them, a tall figure with sharp eyes, stepped forward. This dragon has been abandoned for years. It is dangerous. You cannot control it. Relon shook his head. I am not controlling her. I am listening. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then the air shifted. The station itself seemed to tremble as a massive presence entered through the outer sensors. The dragon matriarch had arrived. Her body was far larger than any human imagination could hold, her scales glinting with deep colors that shifted with her mood. She did not speak. She did not roar. She simply observed, every movement measured and calm, her eyes fixed on her hatchling. Leora stirred, sensing her mother's presence. She did not hide. She glowed steadily, stepping slightly closer to Relon. Her first true words had not been stolen by fear. She had learned something greater, trust. She tapped the floor once, then pulsed a slow sequence of light toward her mother. The meaning was simple: I am safe. I have a friend. The matriarch's enormous eyes softened, and for the first time Relon felt the weight of her approval. The officials had arrived expecting conflict, but the room remained peaceful. The council representative spoke again, his voice sharp, but now tinged with uncertainty. This is impossible. A human, a mere cleaner, has taught the hatchling to communicate. Relon met the question calmly. Not taught, he said. She already had the ability. I only gave her the chance to try. I listened. That is all any creature needs. The matriarch stepped closer, her shadow filling the room. The humans felt the pressure of her presence, but Relon remained calm. He trusted the bond he had formed with Leora. He had learned that strength did not come from weapons or fear, but from understanding. One of the scientists tried to approach Leora, holding out a device to measure her pulses. She recoiled slightly, her light flickering in warning. Relon placed a hand gently between the two. No, he said firmly. She is not an experiment. She is alive. She is learning. She is free. The matriarch lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with Leora's. She did not speak. She did not roar. She simply acknowledged her child's courage and the human who had earned her trust. Leora glowed brightly, her tiny body pulsing in waves that carried meaning even the humans could not understand. She had learned words, ideas, and trust, but more importantly she had learned connection. The council representatives whispered among themselves. Some were angry, some confused, but none could deny the truth. A human had done what no experiment, no soldier, no official order could achieve. He had formed a bond with a dragon. He had given her the chance to speak her mind, to trust, to grow. Relon looked at Leora and then at the matriarch. You do not need to fear us, he said softly. We mean no harm. The matriarch's eyes softened further, and she lowered her head slightly, an almost imperceptible nod of approval. She had come expecting perhaps fear, weakness, or betrayal. Instead she found understanding. Over the next hours the officials observed in silence. Leora began to experiment with new patterns of communication, tapping and glowing in sequences that grew more complex each time. Relon responded patiently, never rushing, never forcing. The matriarch remained close, silent but protective, her presence a quiet shield against misunderstanding. By the end of the day the council representatives began to realize that their orders were irrelevant. The situation had already changed. Leora was no longer a mute, abandoned hatchling. She was a creature capable of thought, trust, and expression. And that transformation had happened because a human had chosen to see her, not as broken, but as capable. Relon stood and brushed his hands over his worn uniform. She has learned what she needed to learn, he said. She knows she is safe. She knows she has a friend. That is enough. The matriarch stepped back slightly, allowing her hatchling to move freely. Leora pulsed in joy, and Relon felt the warmth of achievement in his chest. The galaxy may have arrived with rules, orders, and authority, but it was too late. The bond had been formed. The lesson had been taught. Trust and understanding could not be dictated by councils or laws. Before leaving, the council representatives made a single, grudging acknowledgement. They would not interfere. The human cleaner had proven something far greater than obedience or discipline. He had proven the strength of empathy, patience, and quiet courage. As the room emptied, Relon knelt beside Leora once more. You did it, he whispered. She glowed brightly, tapping the floor lightly. We did it, he corrected himself, smiling. The matriarch watched from the shadows, her eyes soft and approving. She had seen enough to know that her child's first steps into understanding had been guided by someone truly remarkable. Outside, the station continued its quiet hum. The galaxy could debate, argue and analyze all it wanted. But in this small corner, among the shadows and metal floors, something profound had already happened. A human and a dragon had discovered a bridge between species, a connection that could not be broken. Relon reached out and Leora pressed her glowing claw to his hand. "Friend," she tapped softly. He nodded. "Always." And for the first time he felt that the small, abandoned corner of the station was the most important place in the galaxy. The matriarch remained, silent but watchful, knowing her hatchling had been given a gift that no one could take away, the chance to speak, to trust and to grow, guided by a human who had listened when no one else would. History would remember that humanity did not teach the dragon how to speak, they taught it that it was worth hearing. Relon Voss stood in the quiet corner of the lower deck, Leora curled beside him. The station hummed softly, a comforting rhythm that seemed to echo the steady pulse of the hatchling's glowing scales. Months had passed since he had first discovered her, weak and silent, abandoned in the shadows. Now she pulsed with confidence, curiosity, and a brightness that seemed to fill the small room. The dragon matriarch remained nearby, a silent guardian watching over her child. Relon had grown used to her presence, sensing her massive intelligence without fear. The matriarch had not spoken a word, nor had she needed to. She understood the lessons Leora had learned, and she understood the human who had guided her. The council had long since departed. Officials, scientists, and guards had expected chaos, but they had found only trust. They could not undo what had been done. The human cleaner had changed something far deeper than rules or protocol. He had shown that patience, understanding, and kindness could achieve what force never could. Leora's light flickered in a rhythm Relon recognized. It was a question, "What now?" He smiled softly. "Now we grow," he whispered. He tapped a small sequence on the floor, a new pattern they had created together. It meant learning, exploration, and freedom. Leora mirrored it with glowing pulses. The language between them had evolved beyond simple patterns. They could share ideas, feelings, and small stories without speaking aloud. Relon had begun to teach her more than symbols. He showed her the walls of the station, explaining the constellations visible through the observation window. He tapped out rhythms that represented distant planets, explaining in soft words the basics of gravity, light, and movement. Leora listened, glowing and tapping, sometimes adding her own interpretations. She asked questions in pulses of light that carried meaning only he could understand. It was in these quiet hours that the true power of humanity revealed itself. Relon did not command, did not enforce, did not demand obedience. He observed, he listened, and he responded. In doing so, he gave Leora something no council, no scientist, no ruler had thought to give: the confidence to speak, the freedom to exist, and the knowledge that she was worth listening to. One day, as they practiced a new pattern, Leora suddenly paused and looked toward the main observation window. Relon followed her gaze and saw the matriarch, massive and calm, approaching the station's edge. The mother dragon's eyes softened as they met Leora's, and then she turned her gaze to Relon. There was no anger, no warning, no challenge. Only acknowledgement. Relon approached cautiously, kneeling low. "She is your child?" he said quietly. "I have only listened. That is all I could do." The matriarch's massive head tilted slightly. Then, in a gesture that Relon could feel as much as see, she pressed one enormous claw to the floor near him. It was an acceptance, a promise of respect. She had witnessed something humans often overlooked: that care, attention, and understanding could create bonds that nothing else could. Leora pulsed brightly, sending a pattern of light that meant, "Thank you." Relon responded with a smile and a soft tap sequence. "You're welcome. Always." Over the next few weeks, the trio settled into a quiet routine. The sanctuary was no longer just a place for the abandoned or the forgotten. It became a space of learning, of growth, and of connection. Leora explored her surroundings freely, sometimes gliding lightly along the corridors, her glowing scales casting soft reflections on the walls. Relon repaired broken panels, cleaned, and introduced new objects to stimulate her mind. Other humans eventually returned, not to take control but to observe, to learn. They saw how Relon communicated with Leora, how he responded to her pulses, how he created an environment where she could express herself safely. Slowly, they began to understand the lesson that had already been learned: that the greatest gift a human could give was attention and care, not authority or strength. The matriarch sometimes visited the observation decks, watching silently. Occasionally she would hover above the small corner where Relon and Leora worked, letting her presence be known, a reminder that the bond between human and dragon was recognized at the highest level. Yet she never interfered. She trusted the lessons had been learned, and that her hatchling was safe. Relon realized in those quiet moments that this was the essence of humanity at its best. They did not need to dominate. They did not need to prove themselves. Their strength lay in noticing what others overlooked, in giving attention to those who were ignored, in treating life itself as worthy of respect. One evening, as the station's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Leora curled beside him, pulsing softly. Relon tapped a slow pattern, home. She mirrored it perfectly. He whispered, "This is your home now. You are free to grow, to explore, to speak." Her response was a long, steady pulse of light, one that carried meaning beyond words: gratitude, trust, and recognition. The matriarch, watching from the shadows, let out a quiet hum, a sound of approval, subtle but powerful. She had come expecting fear, perhaps even harm. Instead, she found understanding, compassion, and patience. The galaxy outside could debate, argue, and analyze all it wanted. They could send orders, rules, and protocols. But in this small, dim corner of the orbiting station, something far more profound had happened. A human had shown that attention, empathy, and care could create communication, trust, and understanding across species. The hatchling dragon had learned to speak, not through force, not through imitation, but because someone had believed it was worth hearing. Relon placed his hand lightly on Leora's glowing scales. "We did it together," he whispered. She pulsed once, a gentle beat that meant yes. Together they had built something stronger than any law, any experiment, any council could dictate. A bridge of understanding, a bond of trust, and the first true communication between human and dragon in that forgotten corner of the galaxy. As the lights of the station dimmed for the night, Relon looked at Leora and then at the shadows where the matriarch lingered. He felt a quiet pride. Not for himself, but for the lesson humanity had given, that the value of life was measured not in power, but in attention, care, and the willingness to listen. History might record battles, discoveries, and rulers. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, it would also remember a small, glowing dragon who found her voice, and the human cleaner who showed her that she was worth hearing. And in that truth, the galaxy learned something greater than any war or conquest. That sometimes the greatest power lay not in speaking, but in making others feel worth listening to. Relon smiled softly, and Leora pulsed gently against his hand. Together they sat in the quiet hum of the station, a human and a dragon who had discovered that understanding and care could change the world, not with force but with attention, patience, and trust.